Hi guys, so today's lesson is talking about solving for y. So this goes back to equations that we done in quarter one, and our goal is to get y by itself and move everything else over to the other side of the equation, or the equal sign. And it does not matter if y is on the left side or y is on the right side, you just need to have y by itself on one side of the equal sign. And the reason why that we're doing this is because tomorrow we will be talking about slope-intercept form. And slope-intercept form has the equation of y equals mx plus b. So y is talking about our y values, or the y-intercept. M is talking about our slope. X is talking about the x-intercept, or x values. And then b is talking about where the line will cross on the y-intercept. So it's important that we always have our equation in this form when we're talking about slope, because if not, it would be difficult to figure out what all of these numbers are, okay? So look at number one. So we have 2x plus y equals 10. Again, we want to isolate y by itself, which means we need to move this 2x over to the other side. So right now this is a positive 2x, or in other words, adding 2x. So if I want to move it over to the other side, the opposite of adding 2x is to subtract it on both sides. And when you subtract 2x on both sides, notice that 2x minus 2x will equal 0. And we are just going to be left with y equals. And then on the right side, we have 10 minus 2x. And you guys need to say to yourself, can I take 10 minus 2x? Are these like terms? And hopefully you guys are saying, no, we cannot subtract them because they are not like terms. So all that our equation is going to be here is the negative 2x plus 10, or you could leave it as the 10 minus 2x as well. But if you want it in this form, you would put the negative 2x first, and then your plus 10 will be second. And that's the form that we want it in. So that is our answer. Same thing for number 2. We want to isolate y by itself, so I need to move this plus 1 over to the other side. The opposite of adding 1 is to subtract 1. So your plus 1 minus 1 will cancel. You'll be left with y equals. And then x minus 1, again, you cannot take x minus 1 because they are not like terms, so you're just going to leave it alone and just write it on the left-hand side here. So to isolate the y, we got x minus 1 equals y. So in this case, my slope of m would be this imaginary 1 here, and my y-intercept, the plus b, would be negative 1. All right, number 3 here. So again, we want to isolate the y, so the opposite of this subtracting 7 to move it over to the other side is to add 7. So your minus 7 plus 7 will cancel because that equals 0, so you're going to be left with y on the right side. And 4x plus 7, you cannot add those together because those are not like terms, so you will just leave it as 4x plus 7. And if you guys like it in this form, if you guys always want y on the left side, you're more than welcome to flip-flop everything. Just make sure that you keep the negatives where they're supposed to be at and just keep the equation looking the same. So if I wanted to change this one, it could be y equals x minus 1, because that's the same thing as x minus 1 equals y. And then same thing over here, if I wanted y on the left-hand side, I can have as y equals 4x plus 7. So just up to you guys, but as long as you isolate the y by itself, you guys can determine what your slope is and what your y-intercept is. All right, and number 4, so again, isolate the y, which means I need to move this x over to the other side. Right now this x is positive, or in other words, adding x. So the opposite of adding x to move it is to subtract x. Your x's over here will cancel. You're going to be left with y equals. And then your negative 23 minus x, you cannot combine those together since they're not like terms. So you will just leave it as negative 23 minus x. And slope-intercept form, we always have the slope first and then the y-intercept second. So again, if you wanted to flip-flop these, you're more than welcome to. Just make sure you keep the minus sign with the x, or in other words, a negative with the x, and then keep that 23 negative as well. All right, number 5. So again, we want to isolate y by itself, which means I need to move this positive 2x over to the other side. So the opposite of adding 2x is to subtract the 2x. Notice now on the left side we have this minus y, and I want you guys to start seeing minus signs as negative. So when you drop down to y, you're actually dropping down to negative y as well. And then over here on the right, these cannot be combined because they're not like terms, so you will just leave it as negative 5 minus 2x, or the negative 2x minus 5, does not matter. And we need y to be positive, so y always has to be positive. So if you guys remember, a imaginary number right here in front of any variable is a 1, because 1 times y would just give me that y again. So if I want to get y by itself, I actually need to divide by negative 1 on both sides to make it positive, since right now the negative 1 and the y are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So when I divide by negative 1 on both sides, it's actually dividing by negative 1 on this entire thing on the right side. So in other words, when I go to divide, I am taking negative 2x divided by negative 1. So negative 2x divided by negative 1 is just a positive 2x. And then same thing with this negative 5 or minus 5. If I were to take the negative 5 divided by negative 1, that gives me my positive 5. So when I divide by negative 1 on both sides, negative 2x turns into a positive 2x, and negative 5 turns into a positive 5. So my equation is y equals 2x plus 5. Alright, so let's try one more of those. So same thing over here, we still want to isolate y by itself, which means we need to move this 24 over to the other side. So the opposite of a positive 24 or adding 24 is to subtract it on both sides of the equal sign. So 24 minus 24 is 0. Over here you're going to be left with a negative y. Don't forget that minus sign is a negative, so negative y. And then over here on the left side we have x minus 24. You cannot combine those together because they're not like terms, so you are just going to leave it as that. Now, again, y needs to be positive. Our slope-intercept form is a positive y equals mx plus b, so I need to make sure that this y is positive. So I need to move this negative sign, and remember there's an imaginary 1 right in front of that y, so this is saying negative 1 times y. So if I want to get y by itself, the opposite of multiplying by negative 1 is to divide it. And when you divide it, you just need to make sure that you're dividing it on both sides and it's on the entire thing that's on the left hand side here. So if you were to take x divided by negative 1, remember there's an imaginary 1 here, so 1 divided by negative 1 is a negative 1x. You also have to do it with this 24, and remember that minus 24 is a negative 24. So if I were to take negative 24 divided by negative 1, that gives me a positive 24. So my new equation is, if I divide by negative 1 on both sides, I now get, I'm just going to write it up here at the top. So I get negative 1x plus 24 equals my positive y that I want. So this should be our new answer. Alright, so I will do 7, and then I want you guys to try 8 on your own. So 7 here, again, we still want to isolate this y by itself. So the first thing that we need to do is always move the other term that's next to the y. So in this case we need to move the 5x, So right now it's adding 5x, so the opposite of adding 5x is to subtract the 5x on both sides. So your 5x minus 5x will cancel. You'll be left with 3y equals, and then 8 minus 5x. You cannot combine those together, so you'll just leave it alone. And then notice how there's a 3 attached to the y. Again, we need to have y by itself, or in other words, a coefficient of 1. So right now the 3 and the y are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. And remember, when you divide by 3, you need to divide by 3 on the entire thing over here, okay? So my 3's will cancel. I'll be left with y equals. And then notice if I were to take 8 divided by 3 and 5 divided by 3, I won't get a whole number like I did for 5 and 6. So you can actually just leave it as a fraction, because if you guys know, slope is usually written as a fraction because we're talking about the rise over the run. So it is a fraction. So I can just write, if I take 8 divided by 3, I can just write it as 8 over 3. And then same thing with my minus 5x, I can just write it as minus my 5/3 x. Alright, so in this case, for my slope-intercept form, my slope would be this negative 5/3, and then the y-intercept would be 8 over 3. Alright, so I want you guys to try 8 on your own, see what you guys get. So please pause the video, and then when you guys are ready, hit play again, and then I will go through it for you. So go ahead and pause it. Okay, so you guys should be done with 8 now. So this is the answer that you guys should have gotten. You first should have taken the 2x and subtracted on both sides. So these cancel. You are left with 4y equals 8 minus 2x. And then to get y by itself, you should have divided by 4 on both sides. And you should have gotten y equals 8 divided by 4 will give you a positive 2. And then negative 2x divided by 4 would give you a negative 1/2 x. And make sure you guys simplify, okay? Alright, and the last one down here. So we have xy equals 25. So same thing, we still want y by itself, which means we need to move this x. So what does it mean when a variable is shoved up next to another variable? Well, that means that they're multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. So I'm going to take both sides and divide it by x. And again, you can think of this as dividing by a 1x on both sides. So my x's over here will cancel, and I'll be left with y equals. And then 25 divided by 1 is just 25. So you could leave your answer as 25x or over x. But when we talk tomorrow about graphing slope, because you guys will be graphing slope from slope-intercept form, you want to leave this as a fraction, the 25 over 1. And then this x at the bottom will just be moved to the side, because this is still my slope. It's up 25 over 1. But if you were to leave the x down there, a lot of students get confused because our slope is always written as a fraction, so like 4 over 5 or the 25 over 1. So if you just had an x at the bottom, a lot of students get confused. So just know you can always move it up over here and just write 25 as a fraction like that. Alright, and this last one, number 10. So again, we want to get y by itself, but we need to move this 1/3 over to the other side. If you guys remember, to move a fraction, right now the 1/3 and the y are multiplying, so the opposite of multiplying is to divide. But remember, we cannot divide fractions. So what we do is we multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. So the reciprocal of 1/3 is 3 over 1. So you guys will just multiply 3 over 1 on both sides. So on the right side, you're going to be left with y equals, and then 3 over 1 times x would still stay that 3 over 1x. And that's your answer. All right, so if you guys have any questions, email your teachers, but you guys are free to work on your homework.